Okay, Mr. Milker, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for the
Chair.
delay.
So very briefly, we're going to provide, we lost it again. I got 4 words in. Oh, okay, we're back. So again, reporting back to Council pursuant to your direction last July. I'm going to provide an update on the work that we've done over the intervening period, some brief overview of the living wage campaign and the living wage construct, a sense of where we are today relative to that framework, both the city as well as other city agencies, and then the next steps to proceed with certification. So the motion that Council passed last July affirmed its commitment to have the city be certified as a living wage employer and asked staff to report back, and that's the report that you have before you today. Living wage is also addressed specifically in the Healthy City strategy, in the component or the dimension of the strategy that deals with employment and income, making ends meet and working well. And there's 2 actions in that context that we'll speak a little bit more about today. So very briefly, and Council's well acquainted with the issues here and why we're speaking about living wage. Essentially, the objective as set out in the living wage strategy is that residents have adequate income to cover the cost of basic necessities and access to a broad range of healthy employment. The specific targets set out in the Healthy City strategy relate to poverty reduction and an increase in median income by 3% a year through to 2025. Again, you're well versed with this, but what we know is that BC has the highest child poverty rate in the country, and Vancouver's child poverty rate at 22% is higher than the provincial average. And I think the key element here that a significant proportion of those children, 1/3, live in families where at least one adult is working in a full-time capacity. So certainly unemployment is a significant driver of poverty, but also employment at low wages. And I think that's really what we're talking about here today with the living wage and the living wage campaign. Very briefly, the challenges are some very difficult choices for families that are earning those low incomes between basic necessities, which is really about what the living wage campaign is focused on: food, rent, other essentials. The low wages, again, a significant driver, a significant impact is on children. Child development, we've heard this morning, you heard from Dr. Daly around the impact of early childhood development on other significant issues that the city is dealing with presently in terms of mental health and addiction. The range of impacts for children growing up in low-income poverty situations span their entire life, potentially across education, health, justice, and so on. So that's why we're here and why we're talking about this. In terms of the living wage, again, the construct, it is a formula that's been established by the Living Wage for Families campaign. It's the hourly amount of compensation that a family needs to cover basic expenses. So these really are essentials: childcare, transportation, housing, food, clothing. They do not encompass those expenses. A lot of other things that families are faced with that may be considered as non-discretionary. So these really are the basic necessities of life. The number that's quoted, current living wage rate, is set and published by the Living Wage for Families campaign. It varies around the province depending on the cost of living in each community. Currently for 2016 in Metro Vancouver, that rate is $20.64 per hour. It does include both direct salary or wages as well as the value of non-mandatory benefits. So employer-paid MSP premiums, extended health contributions, paid vacation over and above kind of the minimum statutory requirements. So it is a construct that includes benefits over and above simply wages, although it's typically referenced as a living wage rate per hour. To become certified, and this is what Council has asked us to look at, the process to become certified as a living wage employer by the Living Wage for Families campaign requires that organizations adopt a set of commitments. One is that all direct employees, as well as contractors and subcontractors that provide regular ongoing service on employers' premises, are compensated at that living wage rate. So again, for the Lower Mainland, presently it's $20.64 an hour, as well as a process to ensure that those compensation levels track adjustment in that rate over time. To date, there's over 65 employers in BC that have gone through the certification process. Notably, two municipal governments, New Westminster and most recently City of Quesnel. Van City, of course, as a strong partner with the city, showed real leadership in this regard as well. So, a current state assessment for the city. Presently, all city employees, direct employees, are compensated at a rate that exceeds that $20.64 per hour threshold. So, and looking forward over the term of our current collective agreement, where we have collective agreements extended in the future, and what we anticipate those settlements to be, we don't foresee any challenge to maintaining compensation that exceeds the living wage rate. Of note, the certification process does require that employers engage their trade unions, advise them of the process, the fact that we're proceeding with certification, and we have done that. We have discussed this matter with the unions that represent city employees. As I mentioned, the campaign also extends to contractors and subcontractors that provide services. The city has a large number of contractors that we work with, approximately 4,000. The campaign does acknowledge that it's not practical for large employers such as the city to necessarily apply this threshold for every contractor. And there needs to be a set of criteria or paradigm for assessing and applying the living wage requirements. And looking at how we would apply that in our context, our staff contacted two living wage employers, Van City and New West, and have a good understanding of how those employers looked at the issue of contracted services and how they applied that. Our focus has been on suppliers from sectors that are particularly vulnerable to low wages or that pay low wages. The other point of note is that the campaign, the certification process, does not require that employers renegotiate existing service contracts. There's a process to phase in the living wage framework over time as those contracts expire and are renewed. The campaign also has identified a number of criteria or circumstances where employees or contractors are appropriately exempted, and those include students, workers that provide relatively few hours of service per year, small volume or short duration contracts, volunteers. In our case, it would include exemptions would include organizations that lease property from the city, social enterprise, provided social enterprise does not represent more than 10% of an organization's total procurement, and then again, multiple small contracts. So our team has done a fair amount of analysis on the basis of these criteria that are set out here. So one, looking at contracts with a significant value, so a value in excess of $250,000 a year. These are service contracts where the service is delivered on city sites and that are ongoing, and that there's a continuous relationship between the contract provider and the city. Of all of those 4,000 contracts, using those criteria, our staff have identified approximately 120 that would be considered kind of in scope for a living wage. Those 120 contracts represent roughly 45%, 135 million, 45% of the city's total goods and services spend annually. And of those 120, we've identified 4 contracts where, based on the information we have presently, we understand that at least some of the employees employed by those contractors to provide service to the city are compensated below the 2016 living wage rate. Those contracts pertain to custodial services, security, and graffiti removal. The cost, our estimated cost to bring those contracts into compliance with the living wage requirements is estimated at $590,000 annually. Those contracts expire over a period of time, various intervals over the next 2 to 3 years. So that $590,000, if council were to direct us to proceed with certification, would not be incurred this year or next year. It would be incurred incrementally over the next 3 years. So that really is the financial impact for the city as a direct employer. We also have been in contact with our counterparts at other city agencies and can give you an update on that. So the Vancouver Police Department has reviewed the living wage program as well, and will be seeking approval from the Vancouver Police Board to proceed with certification. VPD has identified approximately 200 casual employees that would require a compensation adjustment to bring them to the $20.64 an hour rate. Those individuals are employed on an ad hoc basis as role players for training and as also to assist with the training of their dogs. In terms of contracted services, VPD has identified an approximately $60,000 per year impact on their security and facility related services for a total cost for VPD of $187,000 a year. Again, those costs would be incurred over the coming 2 to 3 years. VPL is in a similar circumstance. VPL staff have identified one classification of employees covered by their collective agreement with QP 391 that are currently compensated below the living wage rate. Shelvers is the classification. The cost associated with addressing that group from a compensation perspective is just over $160,000 a year. And VPL, their security services contract would also require an adjustment to the tune of $105,000 a year. The Vancouver Park Board is kind of, as you know, a unique construct in that the Park Board is not an employer. The staff that provide service on behalf of the Park Board are city employees. The Vancouver Park Board, though, does approve service contracts. So in that respect, our recommendation to you, Council, is to seek Park Board's endorsement for the living wage certification. At this time, we have not identified any direct service costs for Vancouver Park Board. There is one question regarding the concessions that Park Board operates or that are operated in parks. Those arrangements, business arrangements, are quite complex. They're somewhat akin to a lease, and they're also currently under review. So we're not able at this time to provide a precise estimate as what the cost impact might be on concessions. The range would be $0 to $170,000 a year. And then, so those are the city agencies that we've worked with and that have done a comprehensive assessment of the living wage campaign and implications for those respective organizations. What we're recommending, Council, is that as a second phase of work, staff would work with the management and other city agencies to do the same piece of analysis and report back to you on the implications for those other city agencies. Next step then, subject to your approval and direction, would be for the city to submit an implementation plan to the Living Wage for Families campaign. We believe we would be in a position to do this by the end of January 2017. That implementation plan would include communication to staff, to our external vendors. We would need to make changes to our procurement and contract documents, and also to define a process for auditing and tracking compliance with the living wage campaign. Our expectation would be that auditing would be done on a complaint basis. That seems to be the standard approach by other employers that have proceeded with certification. The other action item arising in relation to living wage is a discussion at the Healthy City leadership table. That discussion will be happening in a matter of days. And really, it'll be a workshop with the parties that are represented at that table to understand the Living Wage for Families campaign, the certification process. We will be providing some information to the table, as I understand, as will Van City, regarding their experience. So that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. It looks like Councillor Genova, you have questions? Sorry. There we go.
Thank you. I had a question regarding, that was actually one of the questions that I had already listed before you had briefly touched on it. And I understand that the Park Board is unique in that they do have revenue sharing arrangements with different facilities, but especially with the restaurants. So, I mean, examples would be like Cactus Club in English Bay and the Tap and Barrel. And I understand that they also generate revenue back from that. So they get a portion of that revenue, and that's put towards leisure access cards. It's also put towards, it's my understanding, beautifying our parks, or basically, whatever shortfall they have in their budget to try and pick up the pieces there. I'm also very interested just in looking at the costs in the last report and the question I asked. So we're looking at, $2.82 if a community center association provides a lunch. And I'm guessing that they're contracting out, and I'm not sure if they're contracting out with a living wage employer. However, the Vancouver School Board, it's $7.09 for a meal. So I'm wondering what the impact would be on community center associations, who I understand also hire contractors. Would they, and I know that they provide services to, just as we heard in the other report, to many immigrants and refugees. So would they be affected by this? Would the community center associations also be affected by this? And so it's a two-part question. And would this be effective immediately and amend the lease agreements, or would this be something that would come into effect after the lease was up with those restaurants or service providers?
So, Mr. Chair, through the chair, thank you for the question. So there's, I think, two elements there. One, I'll address the community center associations first. The community center associations are distinct entities, legal entities that are independent from the city. There is, as you know, of course, a relationship, a legal relationship between the park board and those associations, but that relationship as it stands presently does not give the park board any jurisdiction to tell or compel the associations to pay a particular rate, or to undertake any particular practice in respect of contracts they may enter into with other service providers. So I think how I would characterize that is it's probably a topic for conversation, but at this point in time, neither the city nor the park board have the ability to compel, the legal ability to compel the CCAs to pursue certification. Okay. With respect to the leases that the park board enters into with various commercial vendors, this is an issue that I expect that we'll be discussing further with the Living Wage campaign. Our understanding presently is that those leases would be outside the scope. They are not service contracts, they're a lease for space. The park board, as you indicate, does earn a percentage of revenue back on those leases, but they would not be characterized, as our understanding is, they wouldn't be characterized as service contracts such that would be caught within, or would be encompassed within the Living Wage framework.
Very good, thank you. I also understand that there are certain, I don't want to call them exemptions, but there are circumstances where nonprofits, and there will be certain contracts that will be considered. In the case of a social enterprise, and I know that there are many around the city of Vancouver that offer employment opportunities that may be less than part-time employment to people with disabilities, and sitting as one of the councillors who's the liaison to the Persons with Disabilities Committee, I haven't had a chance to meet with them since this report has come out, but I know that something that they have supported in the past is that contract work. Will that be affected at all? And would the city, if the city does currently contract any of those services, would that change with those contractors? Would they need to provide a living wage?
Through the chair, our understanding is that social enterprise and procurement from social enterprise is one of the specific circumstances that is accepted or considered as an exemption, a permissible or appropriate exemption from the living wage requirements. So from a contracting perspective, our understanding is we would still have the opportunity to undertake agreements with those organizations that would not need to require that they pay a living wage.
Okay, I understand to be a nonprofit society, you have to be registered as a society. But with a social enterprise, how does the city classify, or how do we consider a social enterprise? Because there isn't really a standard as there is with a nonprofit or charitable status, which are also two different statuses that you can apply for.
That's a question. I'm not sure whether folks from supply chain or social policy can speak to our definition, how we would define a social enterprise.
Hi, Mary Claire Zach, Managing Director of Social Policy. We identify a social, generally a social enterprise is identified as a business doing a social good, right? So if they may be registered as a nonprofit, some of them are, or they would be licensed as a business, right? So that's
Okay, so it's not just nonprofits. It could be a business that that is able to show that they do meet a social good, and the city would consider them as a social enterprise.
that's right.
Thank you very much. These are just some of the questions that I've received from citizens in the past few days. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor DeGenova, Councillor Ball.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the report. I just had a couple of questions that have come to me, if you could help clarify a few things for me. The actual living wage for families campaign is a what? I do know that there is an overriding nonprofit organization. I believe it's nonprofit, and this is one of the campaigns that is conducted by that organization. So who is actually providing this certification that is mentioned in the report? I understand the campaign exists. It's got a distinguished group of people working on it. Then there is the overriding organization, but who actually is doing what? That's the first question. And where is the number that is being used coming from, the dollar number? How is it arrived through StatsCan, where? And I've had a number of questions about this. How is that number arrived at? And then thirdly, are we going to reassess it every year, or at what time will we assessing it? And then who's going to do the assessing? Will be the City of Vancouver, outside agencies, or if this campaign still exists, I'm just not sure what the process is, and I don't think a lot of other people are.
Certainly. So through the chair, so as I understand the organization that, the nonprofit organization that is running this campaign is the organization that has created the certification program and administers the certification program. That organization, the Living Wage for Families campaign, the organization that supports that publishes the living wage for each region of the province on an annual basis. So it isn't the city that sets that. There's a formula on which that's calculated. We can certainly follow up with council for more, there is more detail available through that organization on the methodology that's used. So happy to follow up and provide more detail around that. But it is it's that external campaign, that program that would set that threshold based on the defined formula.
That would be really helpful, even just having the name of the overriding organization, because it is, no matter how valuable the move may be, I think it's really important to clarify how the decision is made, where the numbers come from, so that not just council knows that, but so does the public know how this is being conducted, just to make things really clear for us. The other thing is, I do appreciate that the last time this came to council, that I mentioned about students being employed, interns, and that being a real concern. But I did also ask that cultural organizations who may or may not be nonprofits, because sometimes the really smaller ones can't even afford to get to being a nonprofit at that point. So they're not commercial, they're on their way, but they are not mentioned here in anywhere, and it is entirely possible that the city has, I know they have employed organizations for over a longer period of time that used younger people, but it was not just at the terms here that we're looking at. So I'm wondering if there's any way that cultural organizations can be included in as I asked before, in the discussion as to the kind of organizations we're looking at. It's not just social enterprise. It is those organizations that are nonprofit and certainly cultural organizations at other levels.
So thank you through the chair to Councillor Ball. The analysis that we've done on the criteria that our staff has established around the provision of services to the city has identified just those 4 contracts that I spoke of. So in terms of other relationships that the city might have with other partners in the community through grants or other funding arrangements, those would be outside the scope of this. This is really organizations that the city is paying to deliver service to the organization, like janitorial services or security services as the prime examples. Not sure if that addresses your question.
Yeah, because what came to me is Expo, the Olympics, the city certainly did do contracts that were long-term with cultural agencies, and not all of them would be in a position to do this, although one hopes they would be in a position. It's just not possible. So I think it's important that we make that clear, because that has been brought to me as something that is of concern. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your help on this issue. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ball. I've got a couple of questions myself, Mr. Mokri, rising from what we've heard. I guess I take it for granted that in our bidding processes, we take certain things out of competition and look for price. So if it was a case of buying a certain number of bolts, we would want all the bidders to propose the same quality of bolts, not one of them say, I'm going to get this contract because I've got the cheapest bolts and they're going to break on you. I mean, and so I raise that because I think what we're trying to do here in procurement is take wages out of competition when it comes to the delivery of services to the city above a certain level. Is that fair to say?
I would agree with that, yes.
Yeah, so we're not, I guess on the question of disabilities, and I don't think this is what Councillor Genova implied, but we don't want someone saying, I can employ people with disabilities at a lower wage and therefore deliver your service more cheaply. That would be the reverse of the outcome we would be looking for with this policy. And that's why I just wanted to clarify that, because I think that sometimes we see people saying that, you know, behind the scenes, we find that some people may be competing more effectively because they are paying lower wages. And this would tend to mitigate against that outcome. Tried my best to avoid that, Councillor Genova. What's your point of order?
That area of supporting people with disabilities and empowering them to live in the community. I just want to set the record straight. And if you want, I can bring up the procedure bylaw, but I felt that you implied that I said something that I didn't.
Okay, well, I certainly meant to say, and I believe I did say, that this was certainly not your intention. So thank you for your point of order. Okay, so that's one thing on the services side. When people are paying the same wage across a number of bidders, they may still be able to achieve a lower price by better management or quality control and so on. Have you heard arguments that suggest that paying the living wage is actually a good business practice for employers who are bidding on contracts?
I think there's a fair body of evidence around the impact of wages and income levels on the engagement of staff. You know, the ability to recruit and retain qualified staff. That certainly would be an argument that we'd be looking at in terms of our own direct employees. To me, it's not difficult at all to extrapolate that to our service providers, that by paying those rates, they'll be able to attract and retain the best people, so that we would see benefit as a service purchaser out of that arrangement.
One of the things that's harder to manage or understand about these campaigns is that we're really creating a better circumstance, we hope, for people that the city staff will never meet. They're the employees of contractors who are doing very important work, but in difficult parts of the city or maybe in the middle of the night. Is there any plan to evaluate this and try to reach out and understand what impact the program would have if it's adopted on the lives of the people that would be receiving an increase or an improvement?
I think one of the things that our team has yet to do is that a next piece of work is really look at how we will be evaluating this program, what the metrics will be, to your point, whether and how we would be able to obtain some evidence directly in terms of the impact. Obviously, those, for contractors, they're one step removed from us. So we don't have a firm proposal at this point in time, but that is the next phase of work for us.
Right. Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Affleck, you have some additional questions?
Just two things occurred to me. One is a follow-up to Councillor Ball's question regarding the organization and any concern that say year over year they say, okay, we're going to have you have to do a 10% increase from last year, and that would create a bit of a problem for us, I would think. Is that likely, or what would happen if that some kind of major increase for whatever reason were to happen? How would we handle that?
We believe the risk of that is low. Looking at the last 5 years, the escalation of the living wage rate has been roughly inflation or slightly below 2% on average over those 5 years. So we certainly wouldn't see a jump in the cost of living in the Lower Mainland that would drive a significant increase there. Ultimately, this is a voluntary program, so the city is not undertaking any legal obligation. So I think that would be the answer.
Okay. And then just to clarify on the park board portion of in the recommendations, one of the challenges the park board has is they only have so much money, and we give them a big chunk of that money, and if suddenly they have to increase their budget by $170,000, the assumption would be that they would then come back to us and ask for that money, and then we would have to approve that money, or how do you see that potentially happen, given that you're embedding this request within this, yet there's no budget number attached?
Absolutely, and I think we've tried to provide a range as a bit of a bookend for what that risk might be. In terms of whether the park board would be able to recoup that impact through other business arrangements, or whether they would be looking at that as a budget adjustment from the city, I think it's reasonable, and that's why we have tried to represent it as a risk. I think our challenge at this point is trying to quantify that risk beyond the very broad range that we've identified, kind of a $0 to $170,000 range. At this point in time, our worst case scenario, if you want to characterize it as that, from a financial perspective on the park board, is that $170,000 number. So that's the upper end that we believe would be the exposure there.
And you extracted park board and put it in this embedded here, but for example, you haven't with the P&E or the Vancouver Economic Commission. You've sort of left those as we'll figure that out later. Why didn't you just do that with the park board? Like, we'll figure that out later. Why is that embedded as now, given that they haven't had this conversation?
So the park board, from an employment standpoint, the employees at park board are city employees. So it's difficult. We weren't able to. We didn't conceive of a circumstance in which we could disentangle the city and park board. They also actually share a number of service contracts with the city. So the city and park board are much more closely connected from an operational perspective than even the library or police board are. It is a unique construct in terms of that relationship. So our view is that it makes sense for the city to be applying for the living wage certification as an employer, which then by virtue would include park board in that. One of the recommendations that we are making to council is that council does seek park board's endorsement for the certification. If park board were to decline that, then that would be an issue that we presumably would have to come back to you and seek some further direction on.
Are any of the employees that are employed by the city taking the concession stands out? Because I would assume those are employed by the people who manage those concessions. Are there any staff within the park board that are under the standard that we have here at $20?
No. They're all city employees, so they're all above that
sort of a moot
$20.64 rate.
issue in some ways. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Affleck. So we'll go to our speakers now. Protocol is we hear from representatives of our unionized employees first. So Andrew Ledger, QP 1004. Not seeing Andrew, but seeing as a reliable substitute.
Andrew had to rush off to another meeting. Let's see if we can get this. What the heck have I done? I'm sorry.
So you got 5 minutes to get over the drill and just tell us.
I'll get 5 minutes of there, don't worry.
Right.
New device. There we are. Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Donnelly, the Communications Officer of QP Local 1004, and a proud 40-year part-time employee of the Pacific National Exhibition. As well as city and parks outside workers, as a local, we represent employees from at least 2 of the aforementioned other civic agencies, for Easy Park, and of course the P&E. I would like to speak mostly about the P&E because that's where I live. The Pacific National Exhibition has long since moved away from a business plan that's centered around a 2-week fair every August. We've constantly We have a constantly evolving business plan that is bringing employment in several sectors outside the actual Pacific National Exhibition, including the retail and hotel sector with trade shows and the growing film industry as a preferred location. The problem is that these economic benefits are not trickling down to our members. In fact, most of these new events only benefit a small number of P&E employees, and usually those listed at the lower wage rates. As a corporation, the P&E boasts as being the largest summer employer of youth in BC. While this may be true by actual number, a much more significant group of part-time employees, precarious workers, do not fall into this category. For starters, we have a group of what is defined in our collective agreement as full-time employees, who in fact only work 4 to 5 months a year due to an uneven event schedule throughout the year. Although their hourly wage fits the living wage model, they barely scrape together the required number of hours to qualify for employment insurance. Granted, a small number of our part-time employees are students or are supplementing their income from either a full-time job or a pension. A large number of our members rely on their wages at the P&E to pay rent, buy clothing, and to feed themselves. Ironically, through somewhat unfortunate circumstances, I fortunately no longer fall into this need category. Also, because of my seniority and abilities, my wage rate, when you include benefits, including employer pension contributions, put me very close to living wage threshold. I should point out that only a tiny fraction of our part-time employees are able to qualify as participants in a municipal pension plan. So rather than speak about my situation, I'm going to tell you about a few of my team members that are affected more significantly. First, there is Mark, a 10-year employee working as event security officer. His wage is $17.90 per hour with 16% vacation pay in lieu of benefits. Mark is in his 40s and rents a basement suite in New Westminster. He cannot survive without holding 2 other security positions at BC Place and Rogers Arena, as well as picking up the occasional contract security position. Dean is a 30-year employee working in the Pacific Coliseum in event cleanup. His wage is $17.79 per hour plus the 16% in lieu pay. Dean is a bit luckier because he gets longer hours because post-event cleanup goes overnight, but he still has to hold down 2 other cleaning jobs to maintain a standard of living similar to Mark's above, and which you may already realize is not an optimal situation for somebody that age. Mark and Dean are actually fortunate because they work on what is known as the P&E side of the operation, that is events primarily that take place in the Coliseum and the Forum. The unfortunate employees work on what is known as the Playland side, where we have all the rides and the games. Playland has become a large revenue generator for the corporation with the addition of new ride attractions and the growing popularity of Fright Nights. Sadly, our members are not benefiting from this cash influx. A good example of this would be Kevin. Kevin and his significant other are sweepers in Playland and work pretty much full-time about 7 months a year from April to October. Their wage is $11.51 per hour plus 14% in lieu of benefits. They have been doing this job for close to 20 years. Kevin and his partner live day to day on the edge of the downtown east side. Working full-time at a physically challenging job does not give them the opportunity to supplement their small income. The recommendation in this report are to update council on the analysis of the certification of implementation of the living wage. It is because of this that I would actually ask council to consider going on to the analysis with P&E, Easy Park, and other agencies. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Donnelly. You're true to your word. I see no other questions, but I have a couple for you just quickly. So the case you just mentioned of the P&E is someone who's working relatively full-time but receiving that low base rate? So you're talking about the 2 people who worked for 11.
Oh, okay. What we have is for our part-time employees and then our seasonal employees like Kevin is what's known as in lieu pay. This would include any benefits that aren't paid, there's no medical benefits. They have to buy their own, we have to pay our own medical benefits. Plus plus that also includes what would be considered vacation pay. For somebody that's been working as long as myself or as long as most of these people I've talked about, even statutory, we're required to get 6% on top of that. So I get an extra 10% in lieu of benefits as opposed to just the vacation pay.
Just to be clear about the example you gave, we don't need to pry in anybody's private life, but they are receiving that for how much work in a year at Playland?
They are working pretty much full-time for 7 months.
Okay, so they're, yeah, so it's, and then it's very difficult to fill that in the other 5 months.
That's
because,
right. And I mean, they have other situations that really they couldn't even do it supplementary.
So what's the, you said the work is arduous. I presume a lot of it's outdoors or could be.
Well,
Can you
they're
just-
outdoors sweeping up and cleaning up, and it takes a lot of effort.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay, and so obviously you're here to support the initiative, or I take it you are, and think it's a good way to go, but you're proposing we focus quickly on the PNE and Easy Park?
Easy Park, well, those are our two units that we represent, yeah.
Okay, and the work at Easy Park is, can you describe it in general terms, cleaning, security, all that kind of category as well?
Easy Park, I'm going to give you a rough, most of it is the actual ticket operators at the booths. I mean, they're also the ones that service the machines and things like that. But and I'm sorry, I can't actually go too much on the operation of them. Yeah.
But it's,
They have about 80 employees, I believe.
and the hours are long, and I presume it could be.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think they're probably about a 30 to 40% full-time, and the rest are part-time. Yeah, and they would get similar wages that we would. Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Elisa Navari, QP 391.
Hi there. Thanks for, I'll just read from what I've written here. I do want to preface, though, to say that I think I would also like to encourage council to look at Easy Park and the PNE for the reasons outlined by our brother here. I want to thank council for allowing me to speak to you today about the living wage. I am so pleased not only that Vancouver City Council confirmed its commitment to becoming a living wage employer, but also, we hope, will be taking action to make it a reality today. As the president of QP Local 391, representing approximately 750 Vancouver Public Library workers, I also want to thank the city staff for including the VPL in their recommendations and considering the library as being part of the broader family of city services. We as library workers are dedicated to providing excellent public service, which includes access to information and learning for all in a safe and welcoming environment. If the city can support the library in achieving the living wage for its employees financially, it will ensure that all the library's current funding will go to maintaining the services we currently provide. What the living wage will mean for the Vancouver Public Library is that our affected members will be able to support their families, participate in the local economy, and give back to the community. It will also bring more stability and opportunity. The living wage will also have a positive effect on workers who are not our members, but who our staff work with every day and who help to keep us and the public safe, which are our security guards. It's great to know this contract group, folks who are our colleagues essentially, may also see the benefits of a living wage. However, I think it's important to recognize that a living wage isn't only about how much you earn an hour, it's also about whether you have access to hours. The issue of precarious work is a critical one, and we hope the city will turn their minds to addressing it through the creation of more stable, secure, and predictable work. As an employee of the library, I am proud to work in a city that has made this commitment to the living wage. As a citizen and a taxpayer, I believe this is real value for money, which will have a benefit well beyond the individual, but to our community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions, but thank you very much for coming. Okay, our next speaker is Catherine Ludgate, Van City.
I'm short. Thanks so much. I'm Catherine Ludgate. I work at Van City Credit Union. We're a living wage employer, and I'm responsible at Van City for both living wage internally and for advocating for other employers to be living wage employers. And I was delighted to be here over a year ago when Council took the bold move to start on your living wage journey. So it's great to be back. I want to say how appreciative I am of the great work that your own staff have done over the last year. It has been delightful to work with Mary Claire and her team, and Nick and Rachel and Andrew in procurement and HR to develop this report. We had such thoughtful conversations about all the detail, because as it turns out, being a large employer, it's in the detail of how you apply the living wage where there's many, many decisions to be made, and your staff has been marvelous. Councillor Meigs, I heard you on the radio this morning, the CBC first thing talking to Rick, and I couldn't agree more with everything you said. When you're a living wage employer, productivity absolutely goes up, turnover goes down. It's been shown in living wage employers across the United Kingdom and the United States that in fact the costs of attraction, retention, and recruitment go down as much as 40% because you've got happy workers who stay with you and do awesome work. And then those workers, when they have a living wage, when they can focus on one job and be engaged citizens, they buy in the local economy. So the family that makes a living wage can afford to get their hair cut. The family that makes a living wage can buy a pizza at the end of the month from the local small business. And so when workers get paid a living wage, they reinvest right here. So it's a great local economic development strategy. You know, the cost of implementation for our credit union, people were worried it would cost a lot for us to implement the living wage. And in fact, they were minuscule. It cost us less than 1/4% of our total annual operating budget. It was a rounding error. The experience of New Westminster is the same. New Westminster would tell you that they've covered the cost of implementation without raising taxes at all because the rising property prices, whatever that's called, the mill rate, is more than covered it off. At Van City, I should tell you this was an unintended consequence. We're actually saving money now. Not only are we saving money because the cost of retention have gone down, but we've gone from an adversarial across the table negotiation with our suppliers to a shoulder-to-shoulder discussion of what we want to do together. So in the first year, our leadership set aside $1 million to become compliant. It took $700,000, less than we thought. And in the next year, we saved $2 million. Because suppliers were no longer providing us with a giant basket of unexamined stuff. We have open houses where we talk about our vision and how we build healthy communities and invite suppliers to come along on the vision. And they have seen that we are now in this work together. And so there has been no increase in our costs for implementing it. And workers are happy. It has had a huge effect on all workers, whether they were affected or not, and frankly on our reputation as a great employer. You know, and I want to tell you a story about Mike, because there's also something you said this morning, Councillor Meigs, about where the real effect will be. We've heard from your staff that all your staff, with the exception of the library shelvers, already make a living wage. Same was true for us. Where the real impact is when you start paying those security guards and those janitors and those contracted temps a living wage, those ones that were actually working at minimum wage. So when you come to Van City, same as when I came in here this morning, the first person I meet is not a City of Vancouver employee. It's a contracted security guard. That's who you meet when you come to Van City. You have to go through our security guards. And when we went through the living wage discussion with our security contract and found out what those guys were making, when their wages went up $5 an hour, one of them took me aside and said, you know, I look after my old mom, my aged mom, and my brother with a disability. Now we can make food choices in my family. Now I can take the bus to work. How is that possible that that was the front line of our credit union, that there was that internal hypocrisy about what we were doing and what we were saying? So bringing your contractors up to a living wage is very, very important in line with your mission and vision and values. And it's just so great that it's embedded in the Healthy City strategy. It is one tool among many to fight poverty in our communities, but is one of the best tools as a municipal government that you can make in the absence of good public policy, as Andrea was talking about, at the federal and municipal levels. The payment of the living wage by municipal governments will start to change the supply chains in our communities. We will start to address poverty in our communities, and we are so happy that you're going to be in the family with us and then help us engage other municipal leaders to join. Thanks.
Thank you. You got questions from Councillor Affleck.
Back to the podium. There we go. Hi.
Hi.
Just a quick question regarding, I don't know how Vancity works with contractors and procurement and all that stuff. You know, we have our processes that we do here. In the case of, say, security guards, you know, as an example for you, let's say when you switched over, the security guard company perhaps who was employing staff at a whatever level that was under that, then suddenly they're saying, well, I can't compete anymore because for whatever reason, they have their business structure that doesn't make any sense. So were there any contracts that suddenly were lost, and then those contractors or companies were upset by the fact that you'd switched over, or do you see that as a potential kind of situation?
Well, that's two different questions. There were contracts that were lost to suppliers. Were they upset? I don't know, because we moved to this open house model where when contracts renew, we invited all the proponents into this open house where we explained the living wage and said, we're not looking for you to find us in your margins. We're going to privilege those folks that respond to our RFPs with how you're going to pay the living wage, and we will pay more if you pay the living wage. For our security firm, luckily for us, and for Mike, who'd worked for us for 17 years, his contracting company, Fusion, said we can see our way to paying the living wage. Vancity now pays more to Fusion to pay a living wage to those employees. We did lose the people that were our janitorial service at head office and got a new contractor that is paying its cleaners a living wage. So were they upset? I don't know. Were they part of an open process where we explained what we wanted to do? Yes, they were.
And you have no idea what the reasoning behind that? They just didn't want to pay their employees. They were going to get the money from you to pay them. They just weren't willing to share the information, or what was it that you think?
I really can't say. We have heard from some folks, if 6 of them come to an open house, 3 of them might respond and 3 might not. 3 of them might say, we just don't want to do it because it's too complicated. It doesn't fit our business model at this time and we're not interested. But in the same industry, we have seen that some suppliers are willing to figure it out with us.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Next, Deanna Ogle.
Hi, and thanks for having me here. I will go through this quickly. So my name is Deanna Ogle, and I'm the campaign organizer with the Living Wage for Families campaign. So we're the campaign that calculates the living wage on an annual basis, as well as certifies employers. And so I can speak directly to your question regarding how employers are certified with our campaign. So we have an employers committee made up of current living wage employers. Vancity is one. And they review the applications, come back with questions, advice, and ways to support and strengthen an implementation plan, and either recommend certification or say, there's a few questions here and we just want to clarify and strengthen that plan. So implementation is actually done by the certification is actually recommended by current living wage employers. And then we as a campaign kind of, do the work to kind of congratulate and celebrate our employers who've taken this step. So hopefully that provides a bit of information on that issue. I just wanted to say congratulations on developing this implementation plan. I think it's fabulous. I think staff have done an incredible amount of work. I think these things kind of get summed up into something that we can digest in 10 minutes in a short number of pages. But what it has involved is a ton of meetings and a ton of digging through of materials. So it's fabulous, and we're really excited to see it. This is an incredible commitment to taking action on working poverty. So a conservative estimate of working poverty in Metro Vancouver indicates that about 100,000 people are living in poverty and working. And just over 40% of those are folks living with children in their homes. So although we know that 1 in 3 poor children are living in homes where at least one parent is working full-time, full year, when we look at some of the issues around part-time work, the number increases to over 40% of children. And that number, the numbers that I gave, don't include folks who are students or young people living at home with their parents. That's precisely people over the age of 18 living independently. This is an incredible leadership role that the City of Vancouver will be taking on. So when this plan is implemented, the City of Vancouver will be the largest living wage employer in Canada. You'll join New Westminster, Quesnel, and the Hoyat First Nations as local governments who have successfully implemented living wage policies. Port Coquitlam and Parksville also have living wage policies and are working on implementation. You're in a race with Port Coquitlam to see who implements first, and I think that's probably the first time you've ever been racing Port Coquitlam for something, but congratulations. So, pardon me? Oh, yeah. So, we, of course, will support the City of Vancouver as you deepen your commitment to the living wage through analyzing the impacts and implications with other civic agencies. We're also encouraged by your work to seek the endorsement of the Park Board. I think that's a really key piece, and to ensure that throughout the city that you have recognition of the living wage and folks have an understanding of what that means. The community associations have many employees working below the living wage. Some of those employees working below the living wage are making the meals that we're providing. You know, and I've seen this when we've done focus groups for families who are below the living wage, where we will have one family member in the focus group talking about what it's like to live below the living wage, and the other family member working, providing childcare at a rate that is normally below the living wage, although of course we bump it up for that evening. But you know, there is an irony that we are providing services to low-income families by low-income families who are working in our community centers and who are delivering some of the services of the city. So I think, you know, it's important to think about what civic agencies are present and how we can ensure that, you know, we're really meeting the needs of our community. In addition to, you know, I think what Vancity has said about community investment and some of the benefits of a living wage, our focus really is on poverty reduction. And I think that's why we're so pleased to see it embedded within the Healthy City strategy. So I think I'm wrapping up my 5 minutes. So if anyone has questions.
Yep. Councillor Ball?
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Ogle, and thank you for your answers as well as all your hard work on this. I also just wondered if you could just tell me where your committee obtains their financial information. Is it from government sources, StatsCan, British Columbia? Where does the info come from, so I can answer this question?
Of course, yeah, no, I think it's a really great question, and I think to get into detail of where we get information, as much as possible we use information from StatsCan. So the rent information we get it from CMHC. The food information we get the food costing information we get from dietitians, that's through the Public Health Agency. And then the costing that we get for childcare, we get from West Coast Childcare Resource and Referrals. So they're working directly with childcare agencies, and we average out the childcare cost for Metro Vancouver. Same with rent. So we're looking again at the average cost for rent for Metro Vancouver. I think if we were to really drill into the costing for the City of Vancouver as well, the living wage would be much higher. So what we're looking at is what is the average for Metro Vancouver, understanding that families live and work often in different municipalities.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful to know where it all comes from. Thank you.
And we do have a report on our website. We work with the CCPA BC to do that calculation with an economist there. So the report is on our website. It's not long. It's a short 8 pages. So it's not, you know, you don't have to worry that you're going to be digging into something. Pardon me?
I did read it.
Okay, great.
I went to your website.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's just nice to have it here.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Kalbeck, please.
Sure. And just as a quick process point, I know that Andrew isn't present, but Warren Williams from QP15 is, and so maybe if we can...
We could put him in at the end, and we're nearly there.
Great.
It's a violation of protocol. You're supposed to sign in at 9 o'clock, but if council agrees, we can do it. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Jeff Kalpick. I'm the Vice President of Community Impact and Investment for United Way of the Lower Mainland. Pleasure to be here today. United Way of the Lower Mainland has been a living wage employer for a number of years now and has proudly supported the Living Wage for Families campaign. By the nature of our work, we know how hard it is for people living here in this region with such a high cost of living. From research we published this spring with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, as Deanna just mentioned, we reported that there are at least 100,000 people working in the Lower Mainland and still living below the poverty line. The majority of those people, over 60%, are in prime working age, 30 to 50 years old, and 42% have dependent children. These families are having to make very tough choices. The old solution of getting a job is no longer a guaranteed path to lift a family out of poverty. Poverty marginalizes children and families and gets in the way of basic human needs like access to food, stable and safe housing, clothing, and childcare. 1 in 5 British Columbians have skipped a meal either because they could not afford food or so that their children could eat. And 1/3 of people accessing food banks are children. For children, we know that the effects of hunger and poor nutrition include behavioral problems, poor social skills, and learning difficulties, and this is not okay. One way to help families move from situations of poverty and food insecurity is by paying people a living wage. It's good for families, it's good for the community, and I got thinking it's good for people's charitable giving and their generosity. I'll take this chance to acknowledge the employees of the City of Vancouver who generously give hundreds of thousands of dollars every year through United Way to support vulnerable people in Vancouver. As living wage employers, we can help people move out of poverty to a place of hope and possibility. So on behalf of United Way, I urge Council to adopt the recommendation that the City of Vancouver become a fully certified living wage employer. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions, but thanks for your patience today. So is it Council's agreeable to hear? I'm sorry, Councillor Carr, did you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that there. You do have a question.
Sorry, I just have one. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm very taken by the statistic that you provided to us just now. 100,000 people in the Lower Mainland have wages below the living wage. Do you have a breakdown of that to know how many of those people are Vancouver residents?
It's a regional statistic. That's working people living below the poverty line.
Yes.
And we can certainly provide to Council the report that we just published with
Thank
CCPA.
you. With the CCPA, that's
Yes.
great. I appreciate that very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. If Council's agreeable, we will vary our procedure and allow Mr. Perquillion to make a comment. Warren, would you like to say a few words? Sorry, Mr. Reverend Bailey, but we'll get back to you.
Through the chair, just want to apologize. I wasn't initially planning on speaking in council today, as others were going to do that much more eloquently than I could. But I did start receiving emails from my members that work in the Parks Board and community associations, and so I felt compelled to speak if given the opportunity, and seeing as how Mr. Ledger was unavailable, I thought there was a good opportunity to do that. I first want to, in the words of the Coast Salish people here, say Haishka, hands up to Council for taking on this initiative. It is going to make a huge difference for the economy of the city and for the citizens that live within this city. So I'm very, very honored to be standing here today to say Haishka. Thank you to you for taking this on. The one concern that I do have, and I'm hoping that Council is going to have a serious look at how to make it happen, is in the community associations. In community associations, you have employees working within the community associations, security, building service workers, childcare workers, that are well below the living wage standard. And those employees are also working alongside my members, who are, of course, as Deputy Mokri said already, just above the living wage standard. And so I'm getting calls from my members saying, what are we doing about the people that we're working alongside? So I'm hoping that City Council will have a really hard look at how to convince the community associations and the Parks Board to get on board with this living wage, and it will benefit them as it will benefit all the citizens of Vancouver to make this happen. So, and again, I would just want to say thank you. I have my own board meeting that I have to be at, so If there are any questions, I will take questions. And then
Thanks for staying. Councillor Genova has a question for you.
You had mentioned that you were compelled to speak as you had heard from a number of your members and that also work at community center associations, or they actually work in the community center associations?
in the community associations.
Okay.
Centers.
So I'm wondering if you've consulted with the community center associations or the presidents, and if I know you can't speak on behalf of them, but if they are supportive of this approach.
I haven't heard that they are supportive. I know that there's been some discussion at board meetings about it, but I haven't heard that whether they're supportive or not.
So I mentioned it in my comments. I believe Councillor Affleck also had mentioned it in his questions before as well. The community center associations, many of them are nonprofits, many of them such as, and I'm not sure if you were here for it, but Strathcona, we're looking at the price of the meals that they're able to deliver for the breakfast programs. I'm not arguing that a living wage isn't better. I'm just, the shortfall will eventually come back to us, as they no longer have a global budget at Park Board, so they come to us for their, well, we would always give them the money, but they would come to us if there was a shortfall. So would you endorse, or would you be supportive of the City of Vancouver topping up the Park Board budget to allow for that?
I would, but also the community associations that, they have programming, et cetera, and a lot of the funding that they receive, they get federal grants, and the federal grants cover the minimum wage for employees, and they have to, and if they choose, they can top up. So they're already getting funding, exterior funding, from the federal government for some of these programs that they are running. So there's money coming in outside of the City of Vancouver, but I would endorse the City of Vancouver topping up, yeah.
And another question is something that our staff had touched on before, which is the revenue sharing. So there's revenue sharing operations right now, and I'm here as a city councillor. And I have to look at this as a city councillor. As a former Park Board commissioner, I also understand that the budget can be very tight, but I also know that the Park Board counts on those revenue generating operations to provide, and especially to top up the leisure access component, which, the inner city families and Vancouver's poorest people also. Perhaps if some of those people, as we heard before, the low income people are earning a living wage, they won't need those services, but there are some that I still believe will need those services. Would you also endorse Vancouver City Council? And again, you don't have to answer my questions, but would you endorse Vancouver City Council supplementing any budget or a shortfall that would come from the revenue that may be lost in asking those contractors to supply a living wage if it came to that?
As I've said already, I believe it's a benefit to the City of Vancouver to have as many employers offering a living wage to their employees as possible. In the end, it will boost the economy of the City of Vancouver and make it an even better place for families to live and work.
So that's yes to topping up the budget. Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Williams, just on that last point, you said your members were calling. Is it their view that they're being asked to top up these programs today by taking a lower wage?
No. They're just, it's their view that they're working alongside these other employees that are making less wages than they are doing similar.
So those people are making a contribution by taking a lower wage?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Great. Okay, that's all for the speakers except for Reverend Steve Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mayor Robertson, members of City Council, ladies and gentlemen. I represent the Anglican Diocese of local here in the Diocese of New Westminster, which is very pleased to be a major organization involved with the Metro Vancouver Alliance, where we partner with labor and community groups to hear concerns and to act on those. And I was able last year at our synod to introduce a resolution which was passed to have the Diocese of New Westminster become a living wage employer. And one of the reasons we did that was so that family life, and that's been mentioned much here today as a value, would not be disrupted by parents, for instance, having to have 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet and lift people above the necessity of making hard choices between rent and food. And so for us as a diocese and as a religious organization, this has meant, the living wage has meant some creative thinking in order to lift people to living wage, to create job situations among cleaning staff, among security, among clerical staff at our some 70 work sites in Greater Vancouver, some creative ways of putting jobs together and supporting people in that way. So Metro Vancouver Alliance does have many faith groups involved, and we're pleased to be part of that, and most excited to see the City of Vancouver play a leadership role. I was privileged to meet with Councillor Stevenson earlier this year, and this morning I heard Councillor Meggs quoted on radio using the word transformative. And of course, religious organizations should be involved in transformative action. The Bible and all major faith traditions talk about economic justice, and I think the City of Vancouver, in adopting a living wage policy, is taking a big step towards social economic justice in our society. I'm also part of the board of the BC Retired Teachers Association, and we work and lobby too on behalf of family, of child poverty, and related issues affecting children in there. And we heard this morning about the importance of early childhood development. So we look forward as a diocese, and the Anglican diocese as being part of the Metro Vancouver Alliance, and to supporting the city in deepening their already strong commitment to the living wage by supporting other civic agencies like the PNE and Easy Park to certify as living wage employees. So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks for coming. There's no questions for you either, I don't think. So we're ready to go to debate on this motion. Councillor Mayor Robertson, you want to lead off?
Yes, I'm happy to move the motion if there are no further questions, which doesn't look like there will be, so maybe I'll dive right in and move the recommendations. And first of all, thank the many people who've gotten us to this point. Thanks to our staff for the work done since last July, I guess, when the motion came forward. There's still work ahead of us, obviously, but it's great to have a solid platform on which to do the balance of our work on the implementation side and pursuing certification. Thanks to Councillor Meggs for his work on Council's behalf on this. You've been a champion for this for many years, and I know our city unions have all been important collaborators on this over the years as well. We've talked about this, and we've had lots of firm but very supportive pressure from partners in the community, whether it's Metro Vancouver Alliance, Living Wage for Families, United Way, Van Cities, all very, very potent and important influencers in the community that have urged us to get to this point. I want to appreciate the work of New Westminster being the first city to take this on, and the Hawaiian First Nation as well. I did not know about Quesnel. That was news to me today. That's great news that there are other municipalities around the province that are on the same pace or even ahead of us. But we've got our work to do now, and thanks to all those who've enabled us to get here. It's an important next step that we be the biggest city in Canada to embrace this and to then promote it and make sure that we can gain more momentum. Obviously, I mean, it's curious. Vancouver's economic growth is leading the nation, but there are too many hardworking families who are left behind due to affordability challenges. We need to address this here in our city to keep this city as livable and just as it should be. And I believe becoming a certified living wage employer is an important piece of that. It sets the city apart as a city that strives to ensure families, all families, have the opportunity and economic security to thrive. And so we need to do our part as a major employer. I'm thankful for the work that staff have already done to get us there internally. But there's a lot of work to do yet on making sure all of the contractors, also working with the park board and the VPD and Vancouver Public Library is going to be a really key next step, I think, to have consistency through all of the various facets of the city. We've got lots of work to do on those fronts, and look forward to those partnerships with the boards of those important entities. Hopefully we can give them comfort that this is doable, that we're going to address whatever financial issues arise from it, and make the bigger investment in the strength of our community and the importance of everyone having a livable wage, a living wage. So again, thanks to all for their work to bring us to this point, and we'll look forward to seeing it come to fruition in the near term. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Councillor Genova.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of the comments from the speakers, many of whom stayed for most of the afternoon today. I do believe that Vancouver, being a very unaffordable city, but also in being a leader, does need to support a living wage. As a city councillor, I hear from people who aren't able to afford to live in Vancouver themselves. However, they're also not able to afford the basic services. Some of these people aren't able to afford to feed themselves or their families, and they go without. More than once, I've been surprised, not just by an email, but to hear, especially as a park board commissioner, that there are certain families that are using food banks that perhaps don't look or are stigmatized that way. But that's one of the reasons the park board goes out of their way to make sure that their leisure access card and their program is confidential. At the City of Vancouver, I'm very confident, given the report that our staff has presented, and I've gone through that and the questions that have been answered, that I can support this here at the City of Vancouver, that I understand that there will be special provisions for nonprofit organizations, and we'll be able to encourage and support those organizations. In recommendation C, it says that we will encourage and support the Vancouver Police Board and the Vancouver Public Library Board. However, in D, I do not see that it says that we will support the Vancouver Park Board. And considering the excellent points that Councillor Affleck had made, and considering that staff themselves have said that they weren't sure how that would work with the revenue generating model that the Park Board currently has, as well as the community center associations that currently, I understand, are their own bodies, so we legally couldn't ask them to or enforce a living wage there. I'm very hesitant to vote on Section D. I will be supporting recommendations A, B, C, E, and F. However, I'd like to ask that D is severed out. If there was the word support in here, and I felt that we would be making up that shortfall, that may see a loss in leisure access cards or $2.82 for breakfast at Strathcona. If I had that comfort, I could perhaps vote for this, but I would need a budget book and I would need to comb through it and see where the city could find the funds to make that up. So without having days to do that or the information in front of me, I don't feel that I should be compelling the Park Board, which is an independent body, to make a decision that they're going to have to make themselves, and that our staff have said they're in a very unique circumstance. So overall, I very much support, and I'm hoping to see a difference. I'm hoping that we will see, as our speaker said, people who are able to afford not even a better way of life, but a way of life that some people, just having a bus pass, being able to have that pizza at the end of the month, whatever that may be for that person, that individual, or that family. I do believe that this will contribute to a better city, a better way of moving forward. But that being said, I leave the Park Board up to make their own decision, considering their own unique circumstances and the lack of any information on us increasing their budget in this report. So I'd ask you, Mr. Chair, if we could please sever out D. Thank you.
Councillor Carr.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. First, I would just like to really thank and congratulate Metro Vancouver Alliance for really bringing this issue to the fore through the last election and subsequently to that, and working with our staff around bringing this to us. So, it's your push that has brought us there. And I think the reason we've come this way too is the inspiration of the other organizations that are here who have spoken, including Vancity, who have spoken about what it has meant for them. And in fact, the benefits that have accrued because of pursuing this. For me, I think this is really, well, I love the fact that it's in the Healthy City report back. This is really so much broader than just talking about money and wages paid and the cost of those wages paid. This is really about the health of our community. And we as a council are committed to ensuring that we provide for the health and the well-being of the people who live within and work within this city. And that's what, to me, this Living Wage campaign is about. There will be a cost. I mean, when we write in a motion like this that we're asking the Vancouver Police Department and Vancouver Public Library, we're supporting those to pursue this. We're asking the Park Board to endorse this. We'll see it in our budgets at the city level, and I recognize that, and I believe that that is an important step for us to take as a city because it is about the social equity. It can be rationalized if you want to rationalize it by knowing that overall social costs come down. That is the experience in other places and other organizations that have done this. Social costs come down. The economy actually benefits locally, and yet I think the most important thing is that the people, the individuals, the families, the communities are better off. So I thank all of you who worked so hard on this, all those who came to speak, spent the day here to provide us with and share with us the wisdom of your experience in this campaign, and wholeheartedly support this.
Thank you, Councillor Zhang.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to support this wholeheartedly. It's kind of interesting listening to the stories. I was thinking of my dad the other night, and pre-union days when he was learning to be a plumber as a journeyman rate or something like this, he made 58.5 cents an hour. And he did that for a while, and then he joined the union and got a living wage for 1950 standards. And boy, did our life get good, I tell you. They were able to buy a house, they were able to eat. We all went to university, me and my siblings, we all did very well. And now we're contributing back because we all have better incomes and feeding back. So there's a prime example of why living wages is so important. And I thank the unions. My dad was UA Local 170 for many years, and they really were on the front lines of fighting for that. Happy to support this, of course, and just so you guys know, I was waiting for this to come. So there's an Easy Park meeting tomorrow, and Friday rather, and I'm on the board, and I certainly will bring this up to the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ball.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to thank our staff for answering all the questions we came forward with, and I think that it is something that a number of us promised before the last election, and it's lovely to see the fruition coming here at the city, and to be able to remind people that the city of Vancouver, by and large, is already a living wage employer, and that we are looking in the other nooks and crannies to be able to make it a change as a full. So I just am really pleased to see this today, and just to be able to remind people how this changes children's lives, and that for me is more important than anything. We make the lives of our children better. Everything is better for the whole city. I do agree with Councillor DiGenova that it would be helpful to just simply sever out D so that the Park Board has the opportunity to consider this, come back to us, and let us know how they feel about it. So if that's possible, I am more than happy to to really enthusiastically endorse the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just say a few words. Of course, severing is always in order. But I think that this statement is pretty straightforward because the procurement for the park board is done by city staff, and the idea would be to align the standards there with the city standards. And I think that it's difficult to see if support implies there would be a payment of any alleged gap between what it would cost to apply the living wage approach and what the park board would otherwise get. It's not clear to me there would be a gap. We've heard today that in Vancity's experience, it's a wash. You can't tell. You take it out. There might be. You just never know from time to time. So I think that it would be good if we went out proactively and said this is how we intend to pursue procurement, just as we say that with regard to our greenest city objectives. So the park board, I don't think, has asked for any particular consideration in that regard. It becomes part of the general budget discussion, and it's dealt with in due course. But council members will follow their own judgment in that regard. I think that I'd just like to echo the comments about the Metro Vancouver Alliance, because this organization is a new player on the city scene and working very hard in 3 or 4 areas that they've selected as a result of very comprehensive grassroots consultations with members of faith communities of every description and nonprofits and unions, community organizations right across Metro. And they've identified housing, living wage, transit, and the general issue of poverty as the areas that they really want to tackle. And they've done it in a very systematic way, and I think it's going to show real benefits down the road. So it's a discussion that the city has with the community, not on behalf of a particular group, but a vast array of community-based organizations that have studied the problems of the community around them and have come up with these solutions, and living wage is one of them. And they very transparently put it in front of all the campaigns in the election. And there was commitments of varying strength, but very strong ones on the part of most of the candidates to go ahead and go down this road. So I think that it's a tribute to the organizing work of all of the organizations participating in the Metro Vancouver Alliance that this has gone pretty smoothly by and large. And good questions have been asked and good answers have been available from the campaign for the living wage and from the Alliance. So I look forward to hearing soon that many more cities are joining this movement, and we start to see some of the benefits, but even more importantly that we see some private sector employers contribute as well, because I think Vancity's experience is very instructive. So happy to support it, and if there's no further speakers, we'll go to a voting queue. And I guess we will vote A, B, C, E, and F first. So all those in favor of A, B, C, E, and F, please indicate. Okay. And now all those in favor of D. So I didn't, Madam Clerk, did you call the first one? It was unanimous, right? Yeah. Okay. And in this case, this one passes with Councillors Ball, Affleck, and DeGenova opposed. Okay. So that concludes the business of this meeting. And Mr. Mayor, do you want to take it all home here?
Thank you, Councillor Meggs, and thanks to everyone for being here for that committee meeting. We'll just wrap up with some formalities, and that being to convene in regular council to deal with the recommendations and actions from today's Standing Committee on City Finance and Services. Madam Clerk, may we have the roll call for council, please?
Mayor Robertson is in the chair. Councillor Louis is on a leave of absence. Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Deal? Here. Councillor Jang? Councillor Breimer is on a leave of absence for civic business. Councillor Meggs? Here. Councillor Ball? Councillor Carr? Councillor Affleck? Councillor DeGenova? You have a quorum, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. We need a motion to adopt the Standing Committee's recommendations. Seconded, and all those in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously, and we have 5 bylaws on the agenda for consideration, which are related to last night's public hearing. And I'll ask someone to move adoption of those 5 bylaws. Councillor Deal moves, Jang seconds, and any discussion? All those in favor of approving the bylaws, any opposed? And that carries unanimously. The list of approved bylaws can be viewed on the city's website. We need a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor, any opposed? That carries. This meeting is adjourned.